Imagine a man about 6 feet tall, his entire body covered in deep wounds from a brutal lashing, before being nailed to a cross. It's a chilling image, but remember, nobody is willing to die for a lie. If you find this story as powerful as I do, go ahead and smash that like button right now. Welcome back to All Religious Story, and if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join our community. The Passion of the Christ wasn't just a typical Hollywood movie. It was the very first time anyone tried to recreate, with total honesty, exactly what happened on Golgotha over 2,000 years ago during Christ's ultimate sacrifice. But here is the crazy part. That production was anything but a normal film shoot. Something deeply unsettling was happening behind the scenes. We're talking about supernatural events, strange feelings in the air, sudden life changes, and coincidences that seemed impossible. On that specific set, the thin line between acting and true faith was completely shattered. The suffering you saw on screen became very real for the cast and crew. Now this is where it gets interesting. The people working on the film quickly realized this wasn't just a project about a man named Joshua. It was a supernatural experience that was changing the lives of everyone there. Think about the odds for a second. What are the chances that lightning would strike the lead actor not just once, but twice in the exact same spot? Beyond that, over 10 serious accidents happened during the filming process. What actually took place during the making of The Passion of the Christ remains one of the biggest mysteries in movie history.
Hollywood completely rejected the film at first, but then the impossible happened. Even though the movie was spoken entirely in Aramaic, Hebrew, and Latin, with no major stars, no big ads, and no studio support, it became a massive global hit. Millions of people around the world felt it was a spiritual experience that went way beyond the theater screen. It ended up becoming the highest-grossing foreign language film ever made. But you won't believe what happens next. After the movie came out, that massive success started to feel like a curse. The big media companies and the industry pushed the creator into his darkest hour. Make sure you stay until the very end, because this story is far from over. 20 years later, the man who stood up to Hollywood is finally coming back. He returns with a bold promise to show us what happened in those mysterious moments between the cross and the sunrise in the upcoming sequel, The Resurrection of Christ. If you want to see more deep dives like this, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. By the end of the 1990s, Mel Gibson seemed to have everything anyone could want. He was the star of Braveheart and the golden boy of an industry that saw him as a legend. But behind the cameras, his private life was actually falling apart. His marriage was struggling, and he was struggling heavily with alcohol. In later interviews, he admitted he felt totally empty and lost without any real purpose. He even said that at one point, he didn't want to live anymore because he saw himself destroying everything he loved. He was trapped in a storm of fame and deep guilt.
But in the middle of that darkness, something happened that he calls divine intervention. One night, feeling crushed by the weight of his own life, he fell to his knees, completely broken, and started to pray. He hadn't prayed like that in years. Even though he grew up in a very religious home, he had walked away from his faith a long time ago. That night, he opened the Bible, and something inside his soul woke up. He started reading the Gospels every single day, becoming obsessed with the story of the crucifixion. He found a new sense of purpose in those pages. He later confessed that he felt he was a terrible man and that his own sins were the first ones to nail Christ to that cross. That realization changed everything. He didn't want to just be an actor anymore. He wanted redemption. He knew the only way to find it was to tell the story of Joshua's sacrifice exactly as it happened, with all the raw pain and truth, without any filters at all. Which part of his transformation surprised you most? Drop it in the comments below. That was the moment the idea for The Passion of the Christ was finally born. It didn't start as a typical Hollywood pitch or a way to make money. Instead, it was a deeply personal vow and a path toward his own redemption. Gibson started obsessing over every tiny detail of the Passion. He studied the Stations of the Cross, the Gospels, and even the mystical writings of Blessed Clara Margaret Hoffman. Her visions described the suffering of Christ with a chilling, terrifying intensity that stayed with him.
It's wild because Hoffman never actually left Germany, yet she described locations in the Holy Land so accurately that archaeologists confirmed them decades later. Gibson became totally consumed. He didn't just want people to sit in a theater and watch a movie. He wanted them to feel Christ's pain, as if they were standing right there in the dirt witnessing it themselves. He wanted the audience to feel the weight of it in their own bones. But here is where it gets interesting. To make it feel real, Gibson decided to do something completely unthinkable. He decided the entire film would be spoken in Aramaic, Hebrew, and Latin. These were the actual languages spoken at the time. There wouldn't be a single word of English spoken on screen. On top of that, he refused to cast any big Hollywood stars. He believed that using famous, recognizable faces would ruin the immersion. Honestly, it sounded like career suicide. If you're enjoying this behind-the-scenes look so far, smash that like button and let me know. Now you won't believe what happened when he took this idea to the big guys. No producer in their right mind wanted anything to do with it. Who would ever pay for a movie in dead languages with zero commercial appeal? When Gibson pitched the idea to the major studios, the answer was a fast and loud no. People told him to his face that it would be the biggest flop in history. Gibson later said that not one person in Hollywood was willing to give him even a single dollar for the project. They kept telling him to tone down the violence, use English, and add a more hopeful ending. But Gibson knew that if he changed those things, it wouldn't be the true story anymore. But here's the crazy part. This was his breaking point. He realized that if he wanted to tell the truth, he had to do it totally alone. So, he made one of the biggest gambles in the history of cinema. He decided to pay for the entire thing himself. He sold off his properties, emptied his bank accounts, and put nearly $45 million of his own money into the production. There was no studio backing him, no distributor, and absolutely no guarantee he'd ever see that money again. If the movie failed, he was going to lose everything he owned. But he wasn't looking for a hit, he was looking for peace. He once said it wasn't a movie he wanted to make, but a movie he had to make. This choice pushed him away from the Hollywood elite, but it brought him back to his faith. Make sure to hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of this journey. Now this is where it gets even more intense. Once the money was set, one question haunted him: who could possibly play the Son of God? Gibson knew this wasn't just another acting job. It wasn't about memorizing lines, it was about showing the total surrender and sacrifice of a person who changed the world forever. He wasn't looking for a celebrity, he was looking for someone willing to actually suffer. For months, he turned down famous actors because he didn't want the audience to be distracted. He wanted them to see the character, not a movie star. Finally, a name came up: Paul Sterling. He was a young Catholic actor with a very calm but intense look. He had been in a few films, but he wasn't a household name yet. Gibson invited him to his home in Malibu to see if he was the one. The meeting was meant to be a quick chat, but it stretched into a deep, 3-hour conversation. They talked about everything: faith, the darkness of the world, sacrifice, and the heavy weight of history. But before they finished, Mel Gibson gave him a serious warning. He looked him in the eye and said, "If you take this part, you might never work in Hollywood again." A heavy silence filled the room. Then Caviezel looked back and said, "Each of us has our own cross to bear. We either carry it, or we get crushed under its weight." It was right then that something truly strange happened. While they were talking about the final details, Jim mentioned that he had just turned 33, which is the traditional age of Christ when he was crucified. Mel stopped dead and just stared at him with a look of pure shock and wonder. Then Jim added, "And my initials are JC." Mel froze up and whispered, "You're freaking me out. If you're finding this story as wild as I am, make sure to smash that like button right now." That moment felt like a sign to both of them. It didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. It was as if something much bigger was behind the scenes, guiding them and pushing them toward a story that was about way more than just making a movie. From that point on, their commitment was total. Caviezel started preparing himself spiritually for what was coming. He prayed before every single scene, went to Mass every day, and spent hours thinking deeply about the Gospels. But his training wasn't just about his soul. He knew his body had to become a canvas for real pain. He went through brutal physical training, but what he was about to go through during filming would be way worse than anything he could have imagined. But here's the crazy part. Once they actually started filming the Passion of the Christ, impossible things started happening on set. There was a strange energy in the air that no one could explain, but everyone felt it. Sometimes a sudden silence would fall over the crew, or a random gust of wind would whip across the set out of nowhere. Gibson chose the ancient lands of Matera, Italy, to shoot the movie. The area isn't usually known for extreme weather, but during production, it became totally unpredictable. Sunny mornings would turn into pitch-black skies in just a few minutes. A scene might start under a clear sky, and then suddenly, wind gusts would hit so hard they ripped tents out of the ground and knocked over heavy gear. At first, the crew just thought it was a weather problem, but then something happened that changed everything. Now this is where it gets really intense, so make sure you hit subscribe and tap that bell so you don't miss what happens next. It started to feel like a warning from above. While they were filming the Sermon on the Mount, Paul Stirling climbed up a hill with his heart on fire. But the weather turned in an instant. The crew had gone into the hills of southern Italy to capture one of the most hopeful parts of the movie. The air smelled like wet dirt and a light breeze was blowing. Stirling was getting ready to walk up the hill while technicians checked the mics and cameras. But suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. Within seconds, the air felt thick and heavy clouds moved in.
He later said that a chill ran down his spine right then. He felt like something was about to happen, and then a blinding white light tore through the sky. A lightning bolt struck him directly, passing through his entire body from head to toe. The light split the heavens and completely swallowed him up. The sound was deafening. Cameras died instantly. People were screaming. For a second, everything was trapped in a supernatural silence. From a distance, Grant Miller saw the whole thing. He saw Stirling standing there, wrapped in a glow, with his hair actually sparking. Miraculously, he had survived. The assistant director, Luca Moretti, ran up the hill to help him. But just as he got to his side, another bolt of lightning struck the exact same spot. It happened twice in the exact same spot in less than 60 seconds. Both men were slammed into the dirt by the massive shockwave. The rest of the crew just stood there, completely frozen, staring up at the dark sky in total silence. If you think about the math, the odds of that happening are basically zero. Some people on the set started crying, while others just started praying. Paramedics didn't waste a second and rushed toward them. But to everyone's shock, both men were still breathing. They didn't have any major burns or even a scratch on them. They were just sitting there dazed, with their clothes smelling like burnt air and ozone. The medical team was stunned because they had never seen anyone walk away from a direct hit like that. If you're enjoying this crazy story so far, smash that like button and tell us what you think in the comments. From that moment on, the whole vibe on the set shifted.
Nobody really talked about it out loud, but everyone was whispering behind the scenes. What were the chances of this being a simple accident? Some crew members said it was a dark warning, while others were convinced it was a holy blessing. But regardless of what they believed, everyone agreed that the energy of the production had changed forever. Every single workday started with a group prayer. Even the tech guys, many of whom weren't religious at all, started crossing themselves before they even touched the cameras. But here's the crazy part. Even the weather seemed to be watching the script. Whenever they filmed scenes of deep suffering, the clouds would roll in and turn the sky gray. But when they moved to scenes of hope or forgiveness, the sun would suddenly break through. Now, this is where it gets even more intense. The time finally came to film the brutal scourging scene. Mel Gibson wanted the footage to look painfully real, so the audience could feel the weight of what was happening. To keep Jim Caviezel safe, the team put a thick wooden board behind his back to catch the blows. But in the middle of that raw, emotional moment, something went horribly wrong. One of the actors playing a Roman guard swung the whip with too much force. The sharp metal tip at the end of the lash whipped around the board and dug straight into Caviezel's bare back. If you've seen the movie, that scream you hear isn't a performance. It was real, agonizing pain. Jim later said he couldn't even breathe, and his entire body went into total shock. You won't believe what happens next, so make sure to hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the rest of this journey. He thought it was just a one-time accident, but it happened again. The second strike was even worse, tearing a deep gash over 12 inches long across his back. He still carries that physical scar to this very day, and that exact moment was kept in the final movie, making it one of the most difficult scenes to watch. But the physical torture didn't stop there. The biggest test was still waiting for him. The day arrived to film The Way of the Cross, and Gibson wasn't using a prop. He insisted on a real wooden cross that weighed over 150 pounds. Caviezel had to drag that heavy timber under the burning sun, falling and dragging himself back up over and over. During one of the takes, he fell, and a soldier was supposed to catch the beam so it wouldn't hit him. But the actor missed his mark. The massive cross came crashing down with all its weight directly onto Caviezel's head. Jim said it felt like his skull was being crushed like a melon. When you see the blood on his face in that scene, some of it is makeup, but a lot of it is actually his own. On top of that, the impact actually dislocated his shoulder. The pain was absolutely blinding. The crew ran to help him, but Caviezel wouldn't let them stop. He was determined to get that fall on camera. He wanted people to see what it truly looked like to collapse under that kind of weight, and Gibson kept the cameras rolling. For the next several minutes, he kept walking with a shoulder that was completely out of socket. Every groan and every tear in that scene was 100% real. It wasn't acting anymore, it was pure suffering. Doctors confirmed the injury later and told him to rest for days, but he refused. He was back on set the very next morning, ready to go again with a numb arm and a swollen shoulder. Grant Miller admitted years later that they never actually reshot that sequence. What you see in the final movie, with the body collapsing and the wooden cross hitting the dirt, is exactly how it went down in real life. By that point, the line between playing a part and reality had been totally wiped away. The actor's actual physical agony blended right into the spiritual sacrifice of the person he was playing. The Passion stopped being just another movie. It became a form of penance. If you're finding this story as intense as I am, go ahead and hit that like button right now. But here is where it gets even crazier. From that specific moment on, Paul Sterling's body just started to give out on him. Filming kept moving forward, but the freezing weather became absolutely brutal. Those final scenes on the cross, the shots of Calvary where the body is hanging between the sky and the earth, were all filmed in the dead of winter. The actor stayed up on that cross for hours at a time, staying perfectly still while wearing nothing but a thin piece of fabric. He was soaked by the rain and whipped by freezing gusts of wind. The crew did their best to keep him warm during breaks, but nothing worked. His internal body temperature started dropping to a scary level. Pretty soon, the medics confirmed what everyone feared. He had hypothermia. His lips turned a dark shade of purple, his hands wouldn't stop shaking, and his breathing became very shallow. Naturally, the producers wanted to shut down the shoot, but Caviezel wouldn't have it, telling them that since Christ didn't come down from the cross, he wouldn't either. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Make sure you hit subscribe and tap that bell so you don't miss out on the rest of this incredible story. The days that followed turned into a brutal test of human willpower. The massive physical strain and the constant freezing cold eventually gave him double pneumonia. His body was so weak, it just wouldn't respond anymore. He was losing weight every single day, and the boundary between the movie and real life started to blur in a really terrifying way. The makeup team had to spend 8 to 10 hours every day covering him in fake blood and deep wounds. To save time, Caviezel actually started sleeping with all that makeup still on his skin. The skin on his face began to crack from the combination of the paint and the biting cold, and the fake skin pieces he wore for days caused painful blisters and sores. There were no stunt doubles used for this, and no digital effects to fake the pain. The suffering you see on screen was 100% real. The cameras caught every bit of it. It was a type of physical sacrifice, a performance that had already gone way past the normal limits of acting. Everyone on set was asking the same thing. Would Grant Miller finally stop the cameras? The crew saw the actor's misery and begged for a break. But Gibson just said calmly that if the actor could take it, the rest of them could too. Both of them knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't looking for a Hollywood show,
They were looking for the absolute truth. It was a truth so deep, it could only be shown through real sacrifice. During the hanging scenes, Gibson told the camera operators to keep the film running even when the actor started having muscle spasms from the cold. Neither of them wanted to make it look easier than it was. There were no clever edits to hide the pain or different camera angles to make it less intense. Gibson flat out refused to cut out the most difficult parts. Caviezel, even while burning up with a fever and dealing with a bandaged shoulder, demanded to finish every single shot. Every tear on his face and every shiver from the cold was the real deal. But wait until you hear what happened next. After the lightning strikes, the whipping, the popped shoulder, and the sickness, the entire mood on the set changed. It wasn't just tired people or fear anymore. It was a heavy presence, a deep feeling, as if every rock, every gust of air, and every shadow was watching them. Nobody could put it into words, but everyone there felt it in their bones. During the most painful scenes, a heavy silence would take over the entire set. You wouldn't hear a single cough or even a whisper. The only sounds were the wind and the quiet crying of people who couldn't stand to watch the screen anymore. Many of the crew members later said they couldn't tell where the acting stopped and where real faith began. Some of the actors would go hide and cry between their scenes. Others found themselves starting to pray without even thinking about it. Even Grant Miller was seen walking away from the cameras with red eyes, quietly whispering prayers to himself. The makeup team was totally worn out from the long days, but they started noticing something weird. They felt this strange, deep sense of peace right in the middle of all the filming chaos. Even weirder, some of the crew said the cameras were picking up strange lights that didn't come from any of the stage equipment. These were quick flashes that would show up and then vanish, and the tech guys had absolutely no way to explain it. The lead cameraman actually swore that while he was zooming in on Jim's face during the scene on the cross, he saw a glowing figure moving right behind him. It looked like a white shadow passing through the shot before disappearing into thin air. But here is the crazy part. When they went back to check the footage later, there was nothing there at all. Soon, rumors started flying through the entire crew. Assistants and technicians were whispering about seeing men dressed in all white walking around the cameras. These strangers were actually giving out directions on where to put the lights or how to angle a specific shot. They seemed so calm and acted with a silent kind of authority that made everyone listen. They give perfect advice and then just walk away. When the crew tried to figure out who they were, nobody knew them. They weren't on the payroll, and nobody had ever hired them. Yet, everyone who saw them described them the exact same way. If you're finding this story as wild as I am, make sure to smash that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. By the time they finished shooting, these stories had basically become legends on set. Several people on the crew insisted that when they looked at behind-the-scenes photos or security footage, these mysterious men in white were nowhere to be found.
It was like they were invisible to the cameras. Mel Gibson later said that there were simply things happening that no one could explain, but he felt everything was happening exactly the way it was supposed to. The vibe on set got so intense that for a lot of people, making the movie turned into a spiritual retreat. Some of the background extras even asked to be baptized or go to confession before the production was over. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. It wasn't just the extras. Some of the main stars actually converted during the shoot. Take Luca Leonello, for example. He was the actor who played Judas Iscariot. Before the movie, he was a total atheist and very cynical about anything involving religion. But after spending those weeks on that set, he admitted he had completely changed. He ended up joining the church and was baptized along with his entire family. He said that playing the man who betrayed Jesus actually helped him understand God's love and forgiveness. He went from being a non-believer to a man whose life was totally transformed by a role. But wait until you hear about what happened to the man who played Barabbas. If you want to keep up with more stories like this, hit subscribe and tap that bell so you don't miss our next video. Pietro Cerubi was the Italian actor playing the criminal who gets set free while the innocent man dies. It was a small part with almost no lines, but it was incredibly symbolic. During the scene in front of the crowd, he was supposed to lock eyes with the lead actor. It was just a look, nothing more. But in that moment, something hit him deep inside.
He later said in an interview that when he looked into those eyes, he didn't see an actor. He saw a depth that felt more than human. He felt like he was being looked at and forgiven by God himself. He couldn't sleep for weeks after that, and he eventually embraced the faith and even wrote a book about his journey. But there were even more surprises waiting among the cast. Right in the middle of all those bright set lights and quiet prayers, one woman was hiding a massive secret. Maya Morgenstern, the actress playing Mary, was actually pregnant during the shoot. Nobody on the crew had any idea, not even the makeup team or Grant Miller himself. If you're finding these behind-the-scenes secrets as wild as I am, go ahead and hit that like button right now. Maya later admitted that being pregnant gave her a natural glow that you just can't fake with movie magic. It gave her an inner strength that showed up in every single move she made on camera. Interestingly, Miller actually picked her partly because of her last name. Morgenstern means morning star in German, which he saw as a powerful sign. That's actually one of the ancient names for the Virgin Mary, the one who brings light when things are at their darkest. But here is where things get really creepy. While Maya brought sweetness to the set, Rosalinda Celentano took on a role that was genuinely disturbing. Out of every moment in the film, there's one scene that still feels wrapped in mystery. While Joshua is being whipped by the Romans and the crowd is screaming for blood, the camera finds a figure moving slowly through the mob. It's a woman in black with a cold, staring face, and she's carrying a baby. But wait until you see this child. It isn't normal. It has the face of an old man, gray skin, and eyes that seem to be mocking the Savior's agony. Now, this is where it gets even more interesting. Miller chose Rosalinda to play Satan because he wanted someone who looked neither male nor female, a face that would make the audience feel deeply uneasy. To pull it off, they shaved her eyebrows and filmed her in slow motion so she wouldn't blink. They even dubbed a man's voice over hers to make it even weirder. She lived on a tiny diet of just rice and beans to look thin and hollow. Her beauty became something uncomfortable and wrong, like a twisted version of something holy. Make sure you hit subscribe and tap that bell icon so you don't miss the rest of this incredible story. In that famous scene, she's holding that strange baby with the hairy back. It was meant to be a metaphor for corrupted love, a sick version of what should be sacred. The director placed that shot at the most brutal moment of the movie, right as the soldiers flip Joshua over to whip his chest. Just as the pain hits its peak, Satan appears like a dark mirror of Mary and her son. It was basically hell throwing a party because it thought heaven was losing. But here's the crazy part. Rosalinda said later that filming that scene absolutely destroyed her emotionally. She spent weeks in total silence just to get ready, but when the cameras rolled, she felt like she wasn't alone. She claimed she could feel a real, dark presence on set, and the air felt heavy and thick. It changed her life so much that she actually quit acting for a while just to focus on painting. Meanwhile, Paul Sterling, the man playing Joshua, seemed to be slipping into a different world entirely. People on set said he wasn't even acting anymore. He had become the character. His eyes looked different, and he barely spoke a word between takes. When he did talk, it was only in a tiny whisper. Crew members saw him staring at the clouds for hours, like he was waiting for a sign from above. When they finally filmed the resurrection, the whole vibe changed. Even though it was freezing, the air felt different. People started crying when the light hit the tomb, and others just stood there in total shock, unable to explain the power of what they were witnessing. When Gibson finally yelled, "Final cut," the sound didn't feel like a movie wrapping up. It felt like a massive weight being lifted. Everyone there knew they had just been part of something that defied logic. As they took down the heavy wooden crosses under the cold, gray sky of Matera, the same thought crossed everyone's mind. It felt like God had actually visited that set. Grant Miller headed back to Los Angeles with a fire in his soul. He had put everything on the line, his money, his fame, and his entire future. But Hollywood wouldn't touch the movie. They told him it was way too bloody, too preachy, and far too risky for a general audience. But here's the crazy part. He refused to give up. He spent $15 million of his own cash to put it in theaters himself. He started small, showing it in local churches and school gyms, letting the news spread by word of mouth like a wildfire. While he did this, the big movie studios were literally laughing at him behind his back. They thought he was making a huge mistake. but they had no idea he was about to start a movement that would shake the entire planet. On February 25, 2004, which was Ash Wednesday, The Passion of the Christ finally hit the big screen. What happened next was totally historic. There were no fancy red carpets or expensive TV ads, but the lines to get in stretched for blocks and blocks. It didn't look like a movie crowd. It looked like a religious pilgrimage. People were holding rosaries, standing in total silence, and whispering prayers while they waited. If you're finding this story incredible so far, make sure to smash that like button right now. The entire Christian world started moving. Churches rented out huge buses, and entire parishes bought every single ticket for local showtimes. What started as one man's dream turned into a massive, global act of faith. Now, this is where it gets interesting. In many cities, the movie theaters turned into actual places of worship. Priests were leading prayers and even holding mass right inside the cinema. People would walk out of the theater crying and shaking, looking like they had just gone through a life-changing spiritual event. There were stories of people fainting or getting dizzy because they couldn't handle the intensity of the scenes where Jesus was whipped. In Kansas, a story broke that shocked the whole world when a 56-year-old woman actually suffered a heart attack and died during the crucifixion scene on opening day. People were literally confessing their sins and praying out loud in the lobby. By the way, if you want to see more deep dives like this, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. From Brazil to Poland and the Philippines, theaters became temples. Churches were packed, and pastors everywhere were preaching about the movie. Then, the impossible happened. This film became the most successful non-English movie in the history of cinema. The box office numbers were mind-blowing. It made over $610 million globally. In the US alone, it pulled in $370 million, beating out every other big-budget blockbuster that year. Think about that. A movie in ancient languages like Aramaic and Latin, with no famous stars or studio help, became a global phenomenon. For 20 years, it held the record for the highest-earning R-rated film in America. It proved there was a huge audience that Hollywood had been ignoring for decades. The big studios that called it unmarketable had to watch their own movies fail while the whole world lined up to see the story of Jesus. Grant Miller had gambled his life savings and won against all odds. But wait until you hear this. Instead of making him the king of Hollywood, his success triggered a total nightmare. A brutal media war started against Gibson. Critics ripped the film to shreds, calling it hateful and too violent. The biggest news outlets in the country basically declared war on him, turning his victory into a fight for his survival. The New York Times claimed his movie brought back old-school hatred from the Middle Ages. The Guardian went even further, calling the whole thing nothing but torture porn. People labeled him a religious nut or a person just trying to spread guilt. Headlines were suddenly screaming about anti-Semitism everywhere you looked. Writers and professors were arguing back and forth about whether Gibson was blaming Jewish people for the death of Christ. Reporters even said he was trying to start a wave of hate, with some demanding the film be banned entirely, while others wanted it studied. But while all these critics were fighting, the theaters stayed packed. If you're finding this story as wild as I am, go ahead and hit that like button right now. Years later, Gibson opened up about why he showed the pain without any filters. To him, the suffering wasn't just a symbol, it was a brutal reality. He didn't want a soft, poetic, or fake version of the story. He wanted every person watching to feel the massive weight of sin on one man's shoulders. He mentioned that he believes in something much bigger than himself, because if he's the one in charge, we're all in big trouble. He pointed out that the followers of Jesus chose to die rather than give up their faith. But here is the crazy part. During the actual filming, every time he tried to make a scene less violent, it just felt wrong. Whenever he thought about cutting a moment out, a voice inside told him to stop. He felt that in those moments, the pain didn't just belong to Christ, it belonged to every one of us. Gibson stood his ground, saying he didn't film the blood for shock value, but out of deep respect. He admitted the truth can hurt, but if Christ went through that out of love, the least he could do was show it clearly. When people called him anti-Semitic, he stayed calm and reminded them that Jesus, his mother, and his followers were all Jewish. He asked how he could possibly hate the very people Christ came from. He insisted he wasn't filming hate. He was filming a way to be saved. As for the movie business, he didn't hold back. He said Hollywood hated the film because they understood the message perfectly, and that's exactly why they didn't want it to exist. Now this is where it gets really interesting, so make sure you subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss what happens next. Years later, when asked if the struggle was worth it, he didn't hesitate for a second. He said he'd do it all over again because he saw how it changed people's hearts, which matters more than any trophy. But in a later talk he confessed that after the first screening, it felt like all of hell was coming for him, like an invisible force had declared a total war on his life. After the movie came out and the attack started, Gibson just disappeared. He stopped doing interviews and barely showed his face in public. While the whole world talked about his work, he fell into a deep, dark silence. He started cutting himself off from everyone. The constant pressure made him angry, scared, and weak. The faith that helped him make the movie was now being tested, and his personal life started falling apart. The old demons he had fought for years, the drinking, the temper, and the guilt, came screaming back into his life. His addictions took over again. The paparazzi followed his every move, just waiting for him to slip up. And believe me, the fall was massive. In 2006, just 2 years after his big hit, he was arrested one night in Malibu for driving drunk. In a moment of pure rage, he shouted hateful slurs that would be heard around the entire world. It only took a few seconds to set fire to decades of hard work. Those words became his official exit from society. Pictures of his face in handcuffs were on every screen on the planet. The media ripped him to pieces, and Hollywood completely shut him out. That moment was his absolute rock bottom. He later described it not as a mistake, but as a public execution. The man who directed Braveheart and won the biggest awards in the world was suddenly a total stranger in his own town. Which part of his downfall surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments. His friends disappeared into thin air, and he went right along with them. Looking back in later interviews, he admitted that he actually thought about ending it all. He felt stabbed in the back, totally embarrassed, and completely lost. He said that after the movie came out, everything just went dark, like he had woken up demons he never even knew were there. For a long time, he didn't talk to the press, he didn't have a job, and he never showed up at any Hollywood parties or award shows. Even his family life started to crumble under the pressure. He lived all alone, dealing with legal battles, going through rehab, and fighting a massive internal war between his guilt and his beliefs. But here is the crazy part. Right in the middle of all that pain, Grant Miller found a brand new reason to keep going, which was the sequel to the movie everyone was talking about. We are going to dive into that in just a second. But first, we have to see what happened to Paul Sterling, the man who actually played the role of Joshua Christ. If you are finding this story as intense as I am, make sure to hit that like button right now. Back in the early 2000s, Sterling was the exact face that every big studio in Hollywood was looking for. He was tall, he had this incredible energy, and he had a voice that was both calm and powerful. People in the industry thought he was the perfect mix of old-school class and modern-day star power. He had just crushed it in movies like The Thin Red Line and The Count of Monte Cristo, proving to everyone that he could lead a massive blockbuster all by himself. Magazines were calling him one of the most talented actors of his age, and every big director wanted him on their team. His future looked like a sure thing. Now this is where it gets interesting. After the film finally premiered, the phone just stopped ringing. The scripts stopped showing up at his door, and his upcoming projects simply evaporated. The movie made him a household name across the globe, and his face, covered in dirt and blood, became a legendary image. But it also made him someone that nobody wanted to work with. During a talk in 2011, he explained the situation very calmly. He told the crowd that people warned him his career would be over, and the sad part was that they were actually right. But he also said that if he had to do it all over again, he wouldn't change a thing. The big studios simply refused to hire a man they saw as a religious fanatic. He was labeled as someone who was too difficult and too problematic to handle. For years, he basically had no work at all, surviving on tiny roles in movies no one saw and quiet appearances on television. But instead of complaining about the role that ruined his career, he decided to lean into it. He started traveling all over the world to talk to people about faith and hope. If you want to see more deep dives like this, hit subscribe and tap that bell so you don't miss our next video. The industry had completely shut him out. His agent even fired him. The news started making fun of his beliefs, and people online were constantly attacking him. He even got death threats just for standing up for what he believed in. But he never backed down. He found safety in his family and his church. He and his wife even adopted 3 children with special needs from China, raising them far away from the cameras. For years, everyone whispered that he was on a secret blacklist. He later said very clearly that he went from being the most wanted actor in town to not getting a single phone call. Even though he did nothing wrong, he just played a part. But his faith didn't break. It actually got stronger. He spent his time in churches, acting in small Christian films, and visiting people in prisons and hospitals. Then, in 2011, things finally changed. After 10 years in the shadows, he got a call for a show called Person of Interest, which lasted 5 years. But wait until you hear about his real comeback. In 2023, he starred in Sound of Freedom, a movie about saving children that the big studios wouldn't touch. It became a massive hit because regular people shared it online, turning the whole thing into a total revolution. Which part of his comeback surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments below. In just a few months, Sound of Freedom turned into a global sensation, making over $250 million and actually beating out huge blockbusters from Disney and Warner Brothers. Jim Caviezel was back in the headlines, just like before, leading a project that Hollywood had totally rejected. Yet against all logic, it became a massive hit. When people asked him how he felt about this comeback, he simply said that God gave him another chance. He explained that when the world shut every door on him, a much bigger one was opened from above. But while everyone was busy rediscovering Caviezel, Mel Gibson was also making his move. After years of staying quiet and fighting his own internal battles, his focus went right back to where everything started, the empty tomb. If you're finding this story as wild as I am, make sure to hit that like button right now. But here's the crazy part. Gibson never actually saw the Passion as the end of the road. He always saw it as just the first chapter of a much bigger story, one that doesn't stop at the cross, but ends in a total victory over death. The new project is called The Resurrection of Christ, and it isn't just a basic sequel. It is the second half of a masterpiece that Gibson never felt was truly finished. For years, he's been writing in secret with his brother Donal and the man who wrote Braveheart, Randall Wallace. Gibson described the script as an experience from another world, something no human eye has ever witnessed on a movie screen before. In a recent interview, Mel used a haunting phrase to describe it, calling it a mystical journey that involves a descent and then an ascension. Now this is where it gets really interesting. The resurrection of Christ isn't just going to show Jesus winning over death. They don't want to just film the moment he wakes up. They want to explore what actually happened between his death and the sunrise. What really went down between Friday and Sunday while his body was resting in that tomb. The story will cover the hours right after the crucifixion all the way to his appearances as the risen Christ. But Gibson let it slip that he's including something never shown on film, the descent into Hades. This is when the Redeemer smashes down the gates of hell to set free the souls waiting for the promise. It's a vision inspired by ancient texts and the Gospel of Peter. There, the Son of God faces the power of death head-on to claim his final victory. It's not just a symbolic story, it's a cosmic event happening between heaven and the abyss. By the way, if you want to see how this epic saga unfolds, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next update. You won't believe how intense the tone is going to be. Gibson describes the movie as a mix of spiritual terror, total hope, and divine glory. He isn't trying to repeat the graphic violence of the first movie. Instead, he wants to show the invisible power of being saved. While the Passion focused on the broken body, the resurrection will focus on the victorious soul. His goal isn't just to repeat a famous story, but to dive into the deepest part of the mystery that changed our world forever. The third day. Gibson has said he doesn't want to make a typical religious movie, but a spiritual experience that forces viewers to look at their own faith, just like the first one made them look at their guilt. Talking to Stephen Colbert, Gibson said this will be the biggest event in human history. We all understand what it's like to suffer, but very few people understand the scale of what happened after the cross. Christ didn't just come back to life, he conquered the entire kingdom of death. The project has been kept under total secrecy, but insiders like Paul Sterling claim this will be the largest movie in history, 5 times more epic than The Passion was. Filming was supposed to start after the pandemic, but it's been pushed back over and over because of Gibson's extreme perfectionism. He has already been back to the locations in Matera, Italy, to make sure he can rebuild 1st century Jerusalem with even more realism than before. He has also spent countless hours working alongside theologians, historians, and experts on the Bible to make sure he shows the exact timeline between the cross and the empty tomb. The movie is going to capture the total shock of the apostles, the heavy silence of Mary, and the pure chaos of the Roman guards. We will see the spiritual world go dark before a massive explosion of light breaks through forever. Gibson says this movie is a trip from the terrifying reality of death to the bright dawn of eternal life. But here is the crazy part, Gibson is hiding a massive secret. At a small meeting back in 2023, he told people that this film will have a scene that nobody will ever be able to forget. It's a vision of what comes after death, based on the deep imagery found in the book of Revelation and the Psalms. If you're finding this fascinating, go ahead and smash that like button right now. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The movie won't just be one long film, it's actually coming out in 2 separate parts.
They are being split up by a very specific symbol, the amount of time Jesus stayed on earth after coming back to life. The first part is set to hit theaters on March 26, 2027, which is Good Friday. Then, exactly 40 days later, the second part will come out on May 6th, which is Ascension Day. That 40-day gap represents the time between the empty tomb and Jesus returning to his Father in heaven. None of this is a mistake or a marketing trick. Gibson says he chose these dates because of his faith, not for money. He wants people to experience this like a sacred event, rather than just another movie series. Make sure you hit subscribe and tap that notification bell so you don't miss our next update on this project. For a long time, everyone thought the original actor would come back to play the lead role. Even the actor himself said he was doing it in several interviews. But then, Mel Gibson made a choice that nobody saw coming. He decided he wasn't going to bring back the original cast members at all. He explained that this was an artistic and symbolic move because he believes every new generation needs to see the face of Jesus with fresh eyes. The main role has now been given to a Finnish actor named Jaakko Otonen. He will be joined by Mariella Garriga as Mary Magdalene and Kasia Smutniak as the Virgin Mary. We will also see Pierluigi Pacino playing Peter and Riccardo Scamarcio as Pontius Pilate. The budget for this project is over $100 million, which is more than twice what the first movie cost. But you won't believe what happens next. The biggest challenge isn't the massive budget. It's trying to show the spiritual world on screen. His team is working with artists and scholars to show what happened in the spirit realm between the death and the resurrection. They want to show the dark places where evil tried to stop the light, and how Christ broke the chains of hell. Producers say Gibson is mixing ancient stories with Bible studies to show the Messiah going down into the depths to save the righteous souls. Gibson says he isn't trying to start a fight, but he wants to show the truth. He wants us to see that the resurrection isn't just a happy ending. It's the start of an invisible war. That is why he says the first movie was about the pain, but this one is about the power. The vibe will be totally different, less blood, but way more mystery and spiritual battle. He isn't trying to beat Hollywood at their own game. While they spend millions on fake heroes, he wants to show the only one who actually beat death. He is doing it with the same passion he had when nobody believed in his first film. He said he doesn't just want to show how Jesus came back, but why he did it for us. Which part of this movie are you most excited to see? Drop it in the comments below. Recently, Gibson summed it all up perfectly by saying that while the first movie showed how much Jesus loved us, this one shows his victory. The resurrection is going to show us exactly how deep that love really goes. It is worth looking back at what happened after the Passion of the Christ became a massive global hit. Suddenly, Hollywood started paying attention to a group they had ignored for a long time, people of faith. They started running surveys, and what they found was actually pretty shocking. The data showed that 10% of people who watched the movie actually changed their religious habits or beliefs because of it. On top of that, 18% of viewers said they started praying more or going to church more frequently.
If you think that's incredible, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into these stories. This massive shift triggered a whole new wave of Christian movies, like God's Not Dead, Heaven is for Real, and War Room. We saw titles like Letters to God and Miracles from Heaven hit the big screen. But honestly, none of them could touch the impact of the original. The Passion stayed in a league of its own. Over the next few years, big studios realized that while faith could pack a theater, you couldn't just manufacture that kind of power in a lab. Believing audiences are very smart and demanding. They don't want fake, sugar-coated stories or easy endings. They want the raw truth. But here is the crazy part. Even though so many tried to recreate that miracle, nobody could pull it off. The movie was actually banned in several countries, and many people in Europe hated how brutal it was. But that controversy just made it more of a mystery. While the business side of Hollywood saw it as a money-making phenomenon, the people watching it felt something supernatural. Experts and psychologists have studied this for a long time, and they all agree on one thing. The Passion caused a massive emotional and spiritual release that went way beyond just watching a movie. Millions of people say their lives were never the same after seeing it. They talk about a mystical effect that wakes up your heart to the reality of suffering and forgiveness. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Thousands of people across the globe, from different cultures and speaking different languages, claim they experience things that simply cannot be explained. We are talking about endless stories of healings, prophetic dreams, and families coming back together. Some people said they felt a physical presence in the theater with them, like a sudden wave of warmth or a strange peace. Others felt a heavy weight on their chest during the scene of the crucifixion, followed by a huge sense of relief, as if something invisible inside them finally broke free. People would cry for hours without even knowing why, and some walked straight from the theater to a church after being gone for years. The stories are everywhere, from books to online forums. In Argentina, a woman said her eyesight started to return after praying in front of the screen. A man in the Philippines felt God speaking directly to him during the hardest scenes to watch. In Italy, a young man struggling with addiction walked away from drugs forever after seeing the film. Over in Brazil, a priest said that during a local screening, the entire crowd started crying and confessing their sins right there in the seats. If you're enjoying this so far, smash that like button to help us share these stories. If you felt something powerful while watching the movie, please share your story in the comments. We want to hear what happened to you, because maybe it wasn't just a movie for you either. Maybe it was a real moment where God touched something deep inside your soul. High numbers of people all over the world still testify that everything changed for them that day.
Many people found peace after years of hurting. Others finally felt a forgiveness they never thought possible. And some just realized they aren't alone anymore. Every story you tell is like a spark, and each word you share here can light a fire in someone else. So tell us what you felt, because for millions of people this movie wasn't just a film. It became a powerful bridge to God, and that kind of faith spreads fast. If this touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. Every week we post new videos to wake up your spirit, help you understand the Word better, and reveal the deep secrets the Bible has for those who are ready to listen. But here is the crazy part that most people miss. To truly see how his story connects to our real world, you have to watch the video on your screen right now. In that video, you will see 10 physical objects that Jesus actually touched which still exist today. If you only look at the movie, you are just scratching the surface. When you see the actual marks he left in history, your faith becomes something you can almost touch. In the world we live in today, just believing isn't enough. You need to understand. This is the final piece of the puzzle. Click the video now. You really don't want to miss this.